I stop sharing, right? And then I start again, right?
What? No, you're good. You just start meeting and then start playing it.
But I mean, like when we go to you, I stop sharing.
Yeah, you stop sharing.
Okay. All right, here we go. Start meeting. Hopefully I don't crash. Hello and welcome to Univision Computer's webinar series. This is the third in the series titled Runbooks Utilizing Automation. We will be setting up a runbook in just a few minutes. Cody and I will be co-presenting today. He enjoys the back-end work and is excited to show you around runbooks and how to set them up. My name is Marie Stavish, and I've been working at Univision on the Business Automation and Intelligence team for over 2 years and have been the team lead for the past year. I'll hand it over to Cody to introduce himself.
Hi, my name is Cody. I've also been working at Univision Computers for the same 2.5-ish years. I have an education in Missoula. I've got a bachelor's of science in computer science with a minor in math. And if I'm not working, you can usually find me outdoors hiking or hunting or even playing video games. And lately, my life has completely revolved around raising a puppy. So go back to Marie.
Thanks, Cody. Let's get started. What is a runbook? Runbooks serve to replace or replicate manual processes through automation. Essentially, they allow computers to execute the same steps that a human would perform manually, but runbooks can be scheduled or ran at a time that is convenient for all. A runbook can be a straightforward task like adding a user to an Active Directory group, getting a list of Active Directory users and their enabled status, getting all user licenses, or monitoring an Azure service. Note that some commands, such as new AD user, require a hybrid worker to complete. Cody will touch on the hybrid worker briefly, but we decided not to go into detail on that today as Microsoft has just released some updates, so the setup we are currently using will need to be updated to the newest version. Azure Automation is the backend for creating runbooks. Microsoft changed the name from Azure to Entra, but it looks like they are still referring to runbooks as Azure Runbooks. It does take some setup the first time, but then you can use that setup and information for any additional runbooks that you make. Cody is going to show you where and how to set those up in just a couple of minutes. The benefit of using a runbook is that runbooks can be scheduled or triggered based on specific events or conditions. Runbooks can be scheduled directly from the runbook interface. You can use Power Apps and/or Power Automate to trigger a runbook, or you can even use a webhook. For instance, you have an onboarding app created in Power Apps, and upon submitting the user, the button click can trigger Power Automate, which in turn calls the runbook to create the user in AD. By using a Power App, you can eliminate most of the human error. Notice that the app has very few open text fields and the users must choose from drop-down list or the information is pre-populated based on the drop-downs picked. This keeps everything consistent in Active Directory. If the new user's name is spelled incorrectly, there's only one way that can happen. The person submitting the name entered it incorrectly. You would not believe how many ways Rock Springs could be typed into a city field. Another example is using a Microsoft form, which triggers Power Automate, which calls the runbook. If you aren't familiar with Power Apps, a form can be a good starting point for triggering a runbook. A form is less able to be customized, but easier and quicker to set up right off the bat. Finally, an example of a webhook might be if a change has been made to a CRM system, such as HubSpot, and you want to push that data elsewhere from the runbook. Maybe you want to push it to a Teams message or an email, or maybe the information is moved into a different customer tracking system. What types of runbooks can I create? Here is the list of possible runbooks, PowerShell and Python. Some of you may have attended our first webinar on using Power Automate. This is a screenshot of the newly released version that looks a bit different than the old version we used in the webinar. I wanted to show you today how you can start a runbook using Power Automate. Once inside Power Automate, you can add the Azure Automation Create Job action. You will need to know the subscription name, the resource group name, the automation account name, and the name of the runbook that you would like to call. This would be a way that you can pass the runbook the parameters that it needs to do its job. For instance, if you want to make a runbook to create a virtual machine, you could send it to the runbook from the Power app, or even just create an item in a SharePoint list, and on creation of that item, the Power Automate flow will start. Pass the information to the runbook, and the runbook will run the job. Note, this process doesn't run in a split second. The onboarding app that I showed earlier takes about 5 minutes to run from start to finish. Also note that you can get the status of the job in Power Automate and get the job output within Power Automate in those actions. Cody is going to walk you through setting up a runbook and showing you a couple of examples. Cody, take it away.
All right. So first things first, I'm going to start off by going to portal.azure.com, and we're going to start off on Azure's main page. So today we're going to be making two different runbooks, both equally as useful. One of them will be getting a list of active users and emailing me a CSV of them. The other one is going to be a scheduled email of a list of their licenses as well, and as well as their costs, so you can get a good idea of how much you're spending on different licenses. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is click create a resource, and in here there are literally hundreds of services that Azure offers. Today we're just going to be looking at automation. I'm going to click create on that. And here I am at the create a resource. First things first, there's a subscription necessary for this. We'll touch in detail after the examples here on how much that costs and stuff, but that is required. And then second, I'm going to need to select a resource group. Now I've already made one, but it's as simple as clicking create new and then giving it a name. This will keep all of our runbooks and different settings for them under one group under our account, so that it organizes it a little bit better. So I'm going to pick webinar automation group. Down here in instance details, I'm going to give it a name, and we're going to use this name, webinar example automation account. And then I'm just going to keep the region as central US. If you were somewhere else in the US or somewhere else in the world, you'd want to pick one the closest to you. Generally, this defaults to the one that is recommended. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and click next. And then in here is a very important setting, managed identities. This is the way that Azure will authenticate different method calls without needing to use passwords and secrets. It's just, or certificates. It's just using the account that this automation account that is signed in under certain privileges and permissions in this organization. And we're going to use system assign so that we don't actually have to have a user sign in every time. And it'll just use the system itself. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and click next. We're going to ignore networking for now and tags, and then just make sure that this validates, and there we go. So I'm going to click create, and this will take a minute to deploy. Usually takes a couple seconds, and you'll see that here. It'll show up a little button that says go to resource. So I'm going to go ahead and wait for that for a few moments, and there it is. And I'm going to go ahead and click go to resource. Okay, so here we are in the automation account screen. And here is basically the hub of everything you're going to be using with runbooks. It's got the main things we're going to touch on today are going to be the runbooks themselves, modules, which are basically PowerShell modules so that we can pull in authorized and certified modules that Microsoft has deemed or Azure has deemed appropriate. If you're using Python, you can use packages. We're going to be using PowerShell today. And then down here is all your account stuff, and we're using identity. So if I go back, let me go back to resource. I'm going to go walk through a very simple case of a runbook just to show you all the screens. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to click create a runbook. And in here, I'm just going to call this very simple hello world. The classic first script that everyone writes. And then we're going to pick PowerShell. Notice those options that Maria touched on earlier. I'm going to pick the most recent runtime of PowerShell, just that I don't have to worry about module versions and stuff. I'm going to ignore the description for now and click review and create. It is passed, so I'm going to click create. Okay, once you do that, it'll automatically redirect you into the code editor. A few cool things about this, you can call other runbooks from here, and if I go ahead and try to add one of these, it should. Sometimes this is a little finicky, and I might just move right past this. It usually will list out like how you would run that other script if you just click add to canvas. Down here we have assets where we can have variables, connections, credentials, certificates. We're not using any of these today, but variables are particularly handy if you have, say, like different environments you need to run this in that have different things to have pre-configured before it runs so that you can organize it that way. I'm going to do a very simple script just to show you the outputs. We're going to just write output hello world. And I'm going to go ahead and jump over to the test pane. That'll save the runbook. I'm going to go ahead and click start now because you'll see it has to queue up. So what's happening in the background when we run these normal runbooks that aren't hybrid, they actually run on Azure's servers in the back end. And so they have to queue up a slot, start it, and then run it. So you'll see as I go through these other panels that it'll say queued, now starting, and then eventually running. On the left here would be lists of parameters you could set before you run it. We're not going to have any parameters today, but that's also useful. And this will also show up in Marie's example on that parameters section in a flow, and you can actually pass parameters to it from a flow. The run settings, so currently it's running on Azure so that it runs on their servers. You can use a hybrid runbook, which means that it would run on an on-premises server instead, so you don't have to wait for those queue up times. It just runs on your own server. And that's very, very useful, especially for testing. Today we're not going to be using it because we don't want to go that far in depth. And then trace level, this is just logging, tracing, and you can see some information about what's happening in the script. And so, perfect timing, it is now running. And very quickly, we will see an output here. And there we go. It output hello world. And that is basically has ran on Azure and then printed out on what would happen here. Okay, so that is a very brief touch on all of this. We're going to be seeing this a little bit more later. I'm going to go back to actually all the way back out and show you some of this stuff up here. If you notice, I need to edit again and I need to publish it. And then it'll let me show you these other things. So if you notice the things we had mentioned, or there's other ways to run this besides a flow and other external stuff. You can link this to a schedule, and we will be doing this for one of them. You can also add a webhook to run this, which is super useful because it allows you to connect other services like HubSpot. You could set up a webhook on HubSpot so that when a form is submitted or something, they have webhooks that can send out HTTP requests, and you can actually give it this URL, which is basically a password. So obviously I'm not going to use this today because I'd get a lot of really interesting things coming at me since this video will be published. But this allows you to send a request to this Azure runbook to then process whatever you're trying to do. Like, let's say one example we've actually done is a HubSpot for these webinars. When someone signs up, it triggers an HTTP request that then runs a runbook that then emails us that that person signed up, so we can do things like invites and stuff. And yeah, and we'll get into those later. Next, I want to go ahead and show you modules, which we'll be using. I'm not going to make you guys wait for me to install all of them, but down here, if we go to shared resources, we'll go to modules, and today we're going to be using Graph. So the way I would actually import this, since this is a new account, is I'd go into add module, I would click browse from gallery, and in this gallery is all of the certified PowerShell modules that Microsoft or Azure has deemed worthy. So I'm going to go ahead and search this, and this looks like it's not. Yep, there we go. And if I were to want to use this module in my script, I'd then click here and notice this is one we're going to be using. In order to get this method, I would then just have this import, pick the version that I want it to run with, and then import. And it probably won't show up the first time. Yep, so if I refresh my page, and this if it's playing nice, it'll show you. I type graph and hit enter. Yeah, there it is. So now it says that module is importing. And the reason I'm not going to go through all these is because we have about 8 that we need to import. And that would take us probably 15 minutes, which we just don't have time for. Okay, so the next important part of this is identities. So this is a system assigned identity. And this is basically an application that has permissions to run. And that the runbook is going to use to get the permissions to run certain graph calls or whatever you're doing. And if I go back into here, and I can go ahead and show you where those permissions would lie. Type in enterprise applications, and this will be very brief because this isn't what we're covering. You can see there's this application, and in here, I can then look at permissions. And right here is where all those permissions would show up, and I'll show you that in our actual run. But yeah, just general idea, this is how it authenticates, and we don't have to have a user sign in every time. It's using the system under this application that has its own default things. There are some scripts or some things you have to do to actually add permissions. I'm going to go ahead and paste this in chat so that people can use it if they need it, and this will help you give permissions to this system assigned or this system user or application. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is I'm going to jump over to my already pre-made account that we already have all the modules in, and I'll go ahead and show that. I type graph. These are all the modules we're going to need to use today. They're all currently set up and installed. They're megabytes big, but that does take a while since it's in the cloud. And yeah, we're using graph, the authentication to connect to it, identity to do licensing stuff, the directory management. Graph.mail, users and user actions are all for getting users and sending out emails and stuff. Next, I'm going to go ahead and show you very briefly the same thing, but I'm going to show you the permissions we're using. So if I type enterprise applications and I go to paste that object ID, go into our account, and we can see the permissions. And I have all these permissions that are needed for all the modules that we're going to use to get the different information and stuff and authenticate. Okay, so let's go back to my, oh, I was already there. Nice going. Let's go to my runbook. And I'm going to create a runbook. This will be my email me active users. And this is just going to be like basically a one-time run that'll give me, just email me a list of the active users. You could hook this up to a flow, super simple and super useful to do this kind of things. So I'm going to review and create, validation passed. I'm going to go ahead and click create. Okay, so now I am in my code editor, and I am going to just copy paste a lot of this stuff and then explain what it's doing. First things first, I'm going to comment because it's useful later if I need to come back and look. And it's just a basic template. And first, I am going to do initialize variables. So I'm going to copy those in. Okay, so what we're doing here is creating a file variable. This will act as the name and the location in storage. Runbooks have their own local storage. It's like a little Azure blob that is dedicated to itself. It's basically the same as if you were running a script on your file system. So it's all relative pathing to where the script is running. Since we're just naming it this will be the path and the name. Okay, and then we have email configuration. Email configuration has a subject for the email, the sender. So I'm going to just use my account, so I don't have to worry about doing send as permissions and stuff, since it'll just be me running it, or the system running it. Message body. This has to be HTML. We're just going to say sent from runbooks on the current date. Email recipients, and I'm just going to use this temporary Gmail account that I've made in order to show you examples of what it looks like when it gets there. And then a person class, and this is for, we do a class so that we can set the types of the different fields it has, so that the CSV creates properly and can it can export correctly. Without the types, it would actually just not work at all. Okay, So for script start, this one is going to be very, very simple. All we're going to do is connect to graph. And by using this graph module that we imported, I'm just going to say connect mggraph, and all I have to do to authenticate is say dash identity. This flag is going to tell the module to use the system assigned managed identity that has its permissions to run certain things instead of me having to actually pass in a plain text password or whatever. Very, very secure and all based on Microsoft's authentication stuff, and extremely handy for us because all we have to do is say dash identity. Next thing, we're going to generate the report. This will be a bit more code that I'll go through. Now, let me go ahead and do that. Copy and then paste. All right, so here we are. First line, this is going to get all users from Microsoft Graph, so all the Azure users. And then we're going to just pull these properties back. Some of these won't be filled out, but just as an example of getting these properties in a normal case, this is what you would use. And then I'm going to make an empty export list so that we can fill this out and then export when it's done. Okay, then a very simple loop. We're going to go through each user in the user list and create that object, that person class, and set their principal name, their company name, and their office location. And then I'm just going to add that to the list. And then finally, once we're done with every user, we then export that list to the CSV path as we have created up above. All right, so then in the next section, the send report, I am going to copy this stuff in. Okay, first line here, or first section, is going to be creating the attachments list. Oh, yep. And then we're just going to pass in one object, and that'll be the file itself that will convert to base64 string and just read from that file location. All the system modules are already basically in there, so it's as if you loaded a terminal for the first time. All of the system modules are available by default. So these are available to me out of the box. This is something I like to do with modules that have a lot of parameters, just for organization's sake. Just make an object with each of the flags and their values. Just makes it a lot easier for me to read. But here, first, we're gonna be creating a new message. So what we need to do is have the sender as the user ID, the message body for the body of the message, the email recipients I've listed above, which is just my Gmail account, as the recipients, the email subject, and the attachments. And the attachments will be that file. And then I'm going to create that new message, which this will return an object that stores into here the information about that message that Graph made, to then be used later here as the send MG user message. And this, all it takes is the user ID that we're sending as and the message ID, which we have right here, so that it can link to that message and send it out. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and publish this. And the reason I'm publishing instead of testing is I want to go through this screen right here. So you'll notice I have some other jobs that have ran, interestingly. Not sure why, because I just made this. Maybe it's because it's remembering, but I'm going to go ahead and refresh this, and I'm going to go ahead and start. And I'm going to go through this screen right here while this is running. So what we have here is the job information screen. And you'll see up here, I can fully stop this job once it starts. I can suspend it, whatever I need to do if it's a longer script. There's those actions up above. I can refresh, and that'll just give me ideas of what's going on with it. It's got the ID of the job, where it's running, what it's running as. So it's running as a user, the system assigned user. When it was created, last updated, the runbook itself, and then a snapshot. And the snapshot is nice because I can come in and see what exactly the code looked like when I ran it. So if I was making a lot of updates and it ran somewhere in between and something happened, I could come in and see, hey, was this where I left it last published, or was this before I published it? And it's just handy to be able to debug some things like that. Okay, so back here, it is still starting. Once this finishes, we'll have an input, which we didn't have any. The output, this will log any logging that I did, errors, warnings, all the logs, and then any exceptions that happened. For now, I'm just going to look at output, and there you can see when we ran connect mg graph, it spits this out, and it says I can use this no welcome flag. I'm not going to because I'm not doing any logging. So I'd like to see if that actually works. And so I'm just going to leave it as is. And now here, any second now, I'm going to get an email, and I have, so I'll pull this over, that I got an email from that admin account, and here is the CSV attached. And it's not formatted super nicely because it's seeing it as a CSV, but here's all the users in my environment and their company name and office location. And again, a lot of those are blank, so it's got this weird formatting going on. But general idea is I got that file from an email just from running from a runbook on the cloud without really much hassle at all. So yeah, next thing I'm going to do is create the user license report. And this time, instead of just an on-demand run, I'm going to actually schedule it. So let's go ahead and start that. So I'm going to create a runbook, and I've missed one step. I'm going to go back in here, and I'm going to view it, and I'm going to just copy everything in here because we're just going to make a little bit of a change in that script. So I'm going to go ahead and click Create Runbook, and I'm going to name this one User License Report. It's going to be a PowerShell script, and we're going to use 7.2 again. I'm not going to do a description for now. This would be useful if you had a bunch of people working on it and needed people to know what it does. I'm going to go ahead and create now that it's validated, and it'll bring me back to the code editor. I'm going to go ahead and paste the old script, and we're going to make a few changes here. Okay, first thing, I'm going to just change the file name so it's a little less confusing for what it's actually doing. We're going to call this user licenses, and same thing, getting the date to store it that way. Email configuration, we're going to change the subject, so again, it's not misleading to what it's actually doing. User license report, we're going to leave all this the same because we're sending it to the same place, same sent from Azure, and same sending from that admin account. In the person class, we are going to need to, before that, actually, we're going to make a new object called license cost. This is an object that we throw together for our projects, specifically for license costs because Microsoft doesn't have a super simple way to do it. And I really don't want to get in the nitty gritty of how you'd actually automate that part. So we're just going to use this object with fairly accurate numbers. Depending on when you're watching this, don't trust this too much. This is mainly just to get an idea of giving us a cost for each one and roughly ballpark correct answers. Okay. So basically, this is just the SKU number, the part number, and then the cost value of each one. We'll use that a little bit later. For the person object, I'm going to add a few more fields here, namely the SKU part number, which will be matching this, and then its cost, which will be matching this. And this way, we have these two new columns in the CSV to report on. All right. Next change we're going to do is in the start of the script, or actually, no, we're going to adjust the loops that I've made a little bit. And I'm just going to copy paste this whole thing and make sure I didn't miss anything. Yep. And you'll see it's a little bit bigger, but really the only difference here is we're getting the users, we're getting the list. For each user, I am going to then get their license detail, and this will actually return me a list of their licenses. And I don't need all of the information, so I'm just going to use the SKU part number. I'm going to tell the module to only bring back the part number. And then in order to get it for the current user that we're on, I pass in that user's principal name. Okay, then for each of those licenses, so now instead of one row being a person in the Excel sheet or the CSV, one row will be a person's license. So if they have several licenses, that'll be a different line for each, a different line item for each license. Okay, so we're going to create this person object with their name, their company, their location, and then we're going to use that licenses SKU part number. And then we're going to, for the cost, look up in the cost table that user's part number and store it in this cost field. And then same thing as before, we're going to add that to our export list. Everything else stays the same here. So I'm actually going to just run this as is. I'm going to publish this. And we are going to go Go ahead and refresh. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and start this, and we'll come back to it. So I'll let this go. I'm actually going to go back here and show you how to link this to a schedule. So if you click that button, link to schedule, you'll notice two options here, or the two settings. One is to link the schedule. The other one is to modify the run settings. We're not using parameters, so we don't need to adjust this. But if you did have run parameters, then here would be ways to set it every time it runs on the schedule, what it's going to run with. So in schedule, we don't have any yet. So I'm going to create a schedule. We're going to call this monthly. This is why I copy paste. I botch typing all the time. Monthly license report. I'm going to do user license report. Okay, and then just to give other people an idea of what this does, runs on the first of the month and emailed a CSV of user licenses. Hopefully I didn't misspell anything. That's why I copy paste. You know us developers. Okay, so on 3/12/20, you have to add this. Is just do the suggested time. If you do anything earlier than that, like if I do like let's see, what time is it right now? If I did like 11:35, usually it won't let me do that, but we'll see if it does. Time zone, we're gonna have it be where I am, Mountain Time Zone. Then we're gonna say recurring once every, and you can do hour, day, week, or month. We're gonna do once a month. And then I'm gonna set it to be the first every month. And you can have it run on the last day of the month, or you can have it expire. I'm not gonna have it expire just for this. It'll probably annoy me later, but I'm gonna go ahead and click create, and it'll probably, oh, it actually did work. Wow, that didn't work in our practice run through, but there you go. Okay, so now that that's set and we have no parameters, I'm going to hit click OK. And by now, this one that I've started should have finished. Yeah, it did. So if we come in here, and I'm going to double check that I have that email. I do. If I come into output, same nice same screen here with no errors. We like to see it. We got 0 errors, no warnings, only one log, same log there, and no exceptions, which is amazing. And I have received that email, and in that email, we look at it a little bit nicer. We've got their name, let me go ahead and zoom in on this a little bit. It's probably really small. We've got their name, the SKU number, and their cost. But notice that this is really useful to me because we've got several licenses for admin. And notice we've got a Flow free account that doesn't cost us anything, but we also have a Flow per user, so it's getting licensed with an actual Flow license. When really we don't need it. We don't need to use this account here because, I mean, it's not costing us anything, but if it was, we'd have two licenses that really are contradicting each other. And or maybe you've got some user that has licenses that they really don't need, and you'd be able to see this every month and kind of keep track of your costs and stuff in your licensing in your tenant. So very useful. We've got a bunch for admin, some for our testing account, some for our various other testing accounts. And yeah, super useful to get. And I can just have this run with ease of mind and consistently every month on the first until I turn it off or until I set that expiration date. And with that, that is all I've got for you. Those are two different run books, one scheduled, one not. Remember, you can use webhooks for HTTP calls. You can use flows like Marie was mentioning. And yeah, hopefully you enjoyed that. And I'll go ahead and send it back to Marie for some more licensing information.
Thanks, Cody. Give me 1 second here to get my presentation pulled back up. Okay, so now we're on to the licensing cost. Licensing, it really varies. It depends on your need. If you probably already have an Azure subscription already if you're thinking about using a run book, but Azure is based on consumption. It's relatively inexpensive, but I would just recommend looking up the service you need in the Microsoft documentation and going from there. Literally, a run is just like hundreds or thousands even of a penny to run one of those runs on a run book. So it's quite effective cost-wise. Learning run books takes longer than an hour, but our hope is that this webinar has sparked an idea and has given you enough information to get started building your own run books. If you happen to have a complex project that you need help with, feel free to schedule a no obligation discovery meeting with us through the contact info on this slide. We are happy to answer any questions that you might have at this point.
No questions as of yet. Give it a moment.
Any questions? We're happy to answer any questions at all that you might have about setting up a run book. Okay, doesn't look like we have any questions at this point. So again, I want to thank you for joining us, and we hope that you'll join us again next